king of the Canadian Hill. Dreadful drawings in our Ontario.
There was a hunter in the middle of the woods who, after a long day of hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in the small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by several portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concentrated effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the hunter awoke. He turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows.
It was about 5 years ago. I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spent the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 or 2 in the morning. I was walking near a police patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, heading straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street sidewalk ahead of me was completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and now was slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I looked away from him for more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. "What?" Regardless of whatever or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back into the better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see.
It was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old son, James, was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he always had a wild imagination. I was in the kitchen feeding our dog Fido when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it was he could be talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mom, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son, so I decided to go outside and check on him. When I went to the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. James, it's time to come inside, I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. James, who were you talking to out there? I asked. James looked up for a moment.
I was playing with my new friend.
He said, smiling. I poured him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would. Does your friend have a name? Why don't you ask him to have lunch with us? I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying.
His name is Laughing Jack.
I was a bit taken back by what he had said. Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like? I asked, a bit confused.
He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles.
I realized my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it's normal for kids to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase. The rest of the day went by as per usual, and it was starting to get late, so I put James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of rundown amusement park. I was scared, running through the endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prize stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched on their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly I began to hear music play. The sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circus tent in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining in the center of the big tub. As I walked towards the light, the music slowed down, and I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought 'twas all fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the light shot on. The intensity of the light was practically blinding. All I could see was a small, dark silhouette shuffle towards me, and then another one appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming towards me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen. All I could do was watch as the haunting figures grew nearer. As they got closer, I could see they were children. As I looked at each one, I noticed that they were horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body, others were severely burnt. The others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh, dragging me down to the ground, and tearing inside me. As the children tore me apart, I faded away. all I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, evil laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After a few deep breaths, I looked over and saw that a few of James' action figures were positioned facing me on top of the nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James's room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I shrugged and placed the toys back into his toy box and headed out to the living room. A little while later, James woke up and I made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't get sleep either. I decided to ask him about the toys. James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room this morning? His eyes shut up at me for a moment and then quickly back down to his cereal.
Laughing Jack did it.
I rolled my eyes and responded, well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in your room. James nodded and finished up his breakfast, then decided to go out into the backyard. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off because I woke up a couple hours later. Shit, I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours, and I hadn't checked on him. I stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him, James, where are you? And then I heard a giggle from the front yard. I rushed through the gate around to the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him. James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard? James, what are you eating? James looked up at me and then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of candies in all colors. This made me nervous. James, who gave you that candy? James just stared at me, not speaking. James, please tell Mommy where you got that candy. James hung his head down and said,
Laughing Jack gave it to me.
My heart sunk. I kneeled down to look him in the eye. James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He's not real. Now, this is a very serious situation, and I need you to know who gave you that candy. I could see my son's eyes tear up.
But Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy.
I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me, but what he's telling me is impossible. I make him spit out the candy and I throw the rest away. James appears to be fine. Maybe I'm just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from Tom or Linda from next door or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep an eye on James. That night, I put James to bed as usual and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was awoken by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. I sprung out of bed and hurried down the stairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown on the floor, and our dog Fido hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the same type that James was eating earlier that day. My shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James's room, followed by loud crashes. I quickly grabbed a knife from the drawer and moved up the stairs with the speed only a mother whose child is in danger could have. I burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed to the floor. My poor son in his bed crying, shaking with fear. A pool of urine staining the sheets. I scooped my child up and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let me use their phone, and I called the police. It didn't take them long to arrive, and I explained what had happened. They looked at me as if I were crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog and 2 trashed robes. The officer told me that someone had probably gotten to the house and done this right before making a quick escape. When they heard me coming up the stairs, I knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come from outside. The next day, James stayed inside. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went into the garage and found his old baby monitor and set it up in his room. If anything comes into his room tonight, I'm going to be able to hear it. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anything hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James to bed. He was afraid, but I promised him that I wasn't going to let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on the nightlight. Before closing the door, I whispered to him, "Good night, James. I love you." I tried to stay up as long as I could, but after a few hours, I felt myself drifting off. My baby boy was safe for the night, and I needed to sleep. Just as I laid my head on the pillow, I heard the soft noise come from the baby monitor I had put on my nightstand. At first, it sounded like interference, like the kind a radio would make. Then it turned into a soft moan. Was James asleep? Then I heard it, the laugh from my nightmare. A horrible laugh. I sprung from the bed and grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed over to James's room and creaked the door open. I tried to light the switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in and I could feel warm, thick liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight came on and I could see absolute horror laid out in front of me. James's body was nailed up on the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open with his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my baby boy. Then I heard it again, the soft, desperate moan. James was still alive? My baby boy? My poor baby? In so much pain, barely clinging to life? I ran across the room and vomited on the floor. But my sickness was interrupted by a horrible crackle coming from behind me. I spun around while still wiping bile from my mouth. Then out of the shadows emerged the fiend responsible for this horror. Laughing Jack, his ghost white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth. His skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeved socks. His body itself was grotesque. His long arms hanging down past his waist. The way he was posed made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh as to let me know he was pleased with his reaction from his work. Then he turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he had laid out. That was enough to shake me from my terror. I snapped. "Get away from him, you bastard!" I rushed at the monster, raising the knife above my head and stabbed down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. The knife passed right through and pierced James's still beating heart, splashing warm blood on my face. Nah, what have I done? My baby. I killed my baby. I immediately fell to my knees, and I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy, my sweet baby boy. I promised Mommy would protect you, but I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Police soon arrived to find me in front of my son, still wielding the knife covered in my baby's blood. The trial was short and sanitary. I was placed in the Furla house for the criminally insane, where I have been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone's playing Pop Goes the Weasel outside my window. I'm going to talk to the orderlies about this in the morning.
When I first met in person with Mary E. in the summer of 2007, I had arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terence, to see her for the interview. Mary had initially agreed, since I was not a newsman but rather an amateur writer, gathering information for a few early college assignments, and if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction. We scheduled the interview for a particular weekend when I was in Chicago on unrelated business. But at the last moment, Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom, refusing to meet with me. For a half an hour, I sat with Terence as we camped outside the bedroom door. I listened, taking notes while he attempted to fruitlessly calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense, but it fit the pattern I was expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying. The more often than not, her objections to speaking with me centered around the incoherent diatribe of her dreams, her nightmares. Terence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise. I did my best to take it all in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time I could perhaps find another similar case if I put my mind and resources to it. Mary E. was a site stopper for a Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992 when she first encountered Smile.jpg, and her life changed forever. She and Terence had been married for only 5 months. She was one of an estimated 400 people who saw the image when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS, though she was the only one who has spoken openly about the experience. The rest have remained anonymous, or perhaps dead. In 2005, I was only in the 10th grade. Smile.jpg was first brought to my attention by a burgeoning interest in the web-based phenomena. Mary was the first cited victim of what is sometimes referred to as smile.dog. The being, smile.jpg, is reputed to display. What caught my interest, other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend and my proclivity towards such things, was the sheer lack of information, usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists, other than the rumor or hoax. It is unique because the entire phenomenon centers on the picture file. The file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly many photo-manipulated simulacra litter the web, showing up most frequently on sites such as the image board 4chan, particularly the X-focused paranormal subboard. It is suspected these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true smile.jpg is believed to have, namely sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. The purported reaction in this viewer is one of the reasons the phantom-like smile.jpg is regarded with such disdain, since it is patently absurd through, depending on whom you ask, the reluctance to acknowledge smile.jpg existence might be just as much as fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither smile.jpg nor smile.dog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia, though the website features articles on such other, perhaps more scandalous stock sites as hello.jpg and 2 Girls, 1 Cup. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to smile.jpg is similarly deleted by the encyclopedia's many administrators. Encounters with Smile.jpg are the stuff of internet legends. Mary E's story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile.jpg showing up in the early days of Usenet, and even the persistent tale that is the 2002 hacker-flooded forums of humor and satire websites Something Awful with the deluge of Smile.dog pictures, rendering almost half of the forum's users at the time of the epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s that Smile.jpg circulated on Usenet and as an attachment of a chain email with the subject, "Smile, God loves you." Yet despite the huge exposure to these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and there's no trace of the file or link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen Smile.jpg often weakly joke that they're far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo. A dog-like creature, usually described as being similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of a camera, sits in a dim room. Only the background detail that is visible being a human hand extended from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is described as beckoning. Of course, most attention is given to the dog, or dog creature, as some victims are more certain than others about what they claim they have seen. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split with a wide grin, revealing 2 rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, human-looking teeth. This, of course, is a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of the victims, who claim to have seen the picture endlessly repeated in their mind's eye during the time frame they are in reality having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue indeterminately, often while the victims sleep, resulting in very mild, disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, though sometimes it is more effective than others. Mary E., I assumed, was not on any effective medication. This was why, after my visit to her apartment in 2007, I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented news groups, websites, and mailing lists, hoping to find the supposed victim of Smile.jpg, who felt more interested in talking about these experiences. For a time, nothing happened, and at length I forgot completely about my pursuits. While I had begun my freshman year of college and was quite busy, Mary contacted me via email, however, near the beginning of March 2008.
Dear Mr. L, I'm incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer when you came to interview me. I hope you understand that it was not no fault of yours, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realized that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me at this time. I was afraid. You see, for 15 years, I have been haunted by Smile.jpg. Smile.dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know it sounds silly, but it's true. There is an inevitable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them more completely unlike any real dreams I have ever had. I do not move, I do not speak. I simply look ahead, and the only thing ahead of me is the scene that is of that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand. I see Smile.dog. It talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, though I am not quite sure what in reality it is. It tells me it will leave me alone if only I do as it asks. All I must do, it says, is spread the word. That is how it phrases its demands, and I know exactly what it means. It wants me to show it to someone else. And I could. The week after my incident, I received in a mail a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a 3.5 floppy diskette. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was in it. I thought about it for a long time about my options. I could show it to a stranger, a coworker. I could even show it to Terrence, as much as the idea disgusted me. And what would happen then? Well, if Smile Dot kept its word, I could sleep. Yet if it lied, what would I do? And who was to say something worse would not come for me if I did as the creature asked? So I did nothing for 15 years, though I kept the diskette hidden amongst my things. Every night for 15 years, Smile Dog has come for me in my sleep and demanded that I spread the word. For 15 years, I stood strong, though there has been hard times. Many of my fellow victims on the BBS board, where I first encountered Smile.jpg, stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing from the face of the web. They are the ones I worry about the most. I sincerely hope you forgive me, Mr. L, but last summer when you contacted me and my husband about an interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy diskette. I did not care if Smile.dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were a stranger, someone I had no connection with, and I thought I would not feel sorrow when you took the diskette as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized what I was doing. I was plotting to ruin your life. I could not stand the thought, and in fact, I still cannot. I am ashamed, Mr. L, and I hope that this warning will dissuade you from further investigation of Smile.jpg. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then wholly more deprived. Someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile.dog's orders. Stop while you're still whole. Sincerely, Mary E.
Terrence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife had killed herself whilst cleaning up the various things she'd left behind, closing email accounts and the like. He happened upon the above message. He was a man in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He'd found the diskette, he revealed, and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that disturbed him, however, was how the diskette had hissed as it melted, like some sort of animal, he said. I will admit, I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first I thought perhaps it was a joke, with a couple of blatantly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago's newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary E. was indeed dead. There was, of course, no mention of the suicide in the article. I decided that for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile.jpg, especially since the finals are coming up at the end of May. But the world has odd ways of treating us. Almost a full year after I returned from my disastrous interview with Mary E., I received another email.
Hello? I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you are interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it. It is not as bad as everyone says. I have sent it to you here. Just spreading the word. Smile face emoji.
The final line chilled me to the bone. According to my email client, there was one file attachment called Naturally Smile.jpg. I considered downloading it for some time. It was most likely a fake, I imagined, and even if I wasn't, I was never wholly convinced of Smile.jpg's particular powers. Mary E's account had shaken me, yes, but she was probably mentally unbalanced anyway. After all, how could a simple image do what smile.jpg was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend exist at all? If I downloaded the image, if I looked at it, if Mary turned out to be correct, if Smile.dog came to me in my dreams, demanding that I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I died? Would I simply spread the word, eager to put it all to rest? If I chose the latter road, how could I do it? Whom would I burden in turn? If I went through my early intention to write a short article about Smile.jpg, I decided I could attach it as evidence. And anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest, would be affected. Even assuming the smile.jpg attached to the email was genuine, would I be conspicuous enough to save myself in the manner? Could I spread the word? Yes. Yes, I could.